Okay, so today's daf is Kuf Nun Daled. We are starting literally with the first word of Kuf Nun Daled Amud Aleph because we ended at the very last word of Kuf Nun Gimel Amud Bet yesterday. Now, what's being discussed here is something called Lav de Mechamer. Mechamer is the prohibition in the Torah of using your animal to work on Shabbat. Obviously, the primary meaning of it is using your animal to transport objects, really, on Shabbat. That your animal will carry things from one place to another, as we mentioned yesterday. It's called mechamer. So we have an unusual situation in mechamer, which is that it's considered a violation of Shabbat to utilize your animal to transport objects on Shabbat, for instance, but it's not. It doesn't seem to be on the same level of violation as an actual performance of malacha by a human being on Shabbat. Now, yesterday we had quoted a view that indicated that mechamer is the same level of stringency. That was Rami Bar Chama said, "Mechamer achar behemto b'Shabbat b'shogeg chayav chatat b'mezir chayav sekila." According to Rami Bar Chama, there's no difference between a person who performs melacha himself and having your animal perform the melacha by having it carry the items for you. Same consequences. If you did it by accident, you bring a korban. If you did it on purpose, chayav skila. You could be put to death for what the animal did, because you were instrumental. I mean, obviously, if the animal goes and picks something up, it's not you, but it means you're guiding the animal. If you're guiding the animal and doing it, then you're just using it. It's like using a hammer to build something. You built it. Just because the hammer was in your hand doesn't mean I could say the hammer did it. So now we come to the beginning of the new Amud, and it says Rav Zavid Matni Hachi. Rav Zavid had a different take here. Amar Rami Bar Chama, this is what Rabbi Bar Chama said: Hamechamer achar behema b'Shabbat b'shogeg eno chayav chatat b'mezir chayav sekila. This is an emendation of yesterday. Yesterday he said that if you did it by accident, you led your animal carrying items by accident, you have to bring a korban. If you did it on purpose, you would have the death penalty. In other words, the same as any other violation of Shabbat. Here he's saying no. If you did it on purpose, you have the death penalty. That's correct. But if you did it by accident, patur, exempt. So why should that be? That sounds like a disparate rulings, because normally the two go hand in hand. Whatever is a death penalty if it's on purpose.
It's not the same yesterday and today.
No, because yesterday said if you did it by accident, korban chatat. If you did it on purpose, chayav sekila. Today he's saying if you did it by accident, nothing. If you did it on purpose, chayav sekila. Yeah, that's the difference. But the question is, normally the two go together. That's incommensurate. Normally it's two sides of the same coin. So Mativ Rava said, he raised an objection. It says that anybody who violates Shabbat in a matter that would require him to bring a korban by accident, if he does the same thing on purpose, he's chayav sekila. He's liable to the death penalty. So you have a problem, because over here, so here, since you're telling me when it comes to leading your animal carrying a burden, you're telling me he's not going to have to bring a korban if he does it by accident. So he shouldn't be chayav sekila. He shouldn't be liable to the death penalty, because it says that anybody who does something that would make him liable to a sacrifice if it were done by accident is liable to the death penalty if he does it on purpose.
So you assume that if he wasn't, then he shouldn't.
Right. So if he's not liable to a korban for doing it by accident, he shouldn't be liable to the death penalty for doing it on purpose. So the Gemara answers, no. Mikataneha in chayavin kule. It doesn't say what you're inferring. Hachi this is what it means. Davar shechayavin al shigato chatat, chayavin al zidno sekila. V'yesh davar shein chayavin al shigato chatat, v'chayavin al zidno sekila. Umayni umechamer. And what does the Gemara answer? Very simply. If I tell you anything that you have to bring a korban chatat for when you do it by accident, you are liable for the death penalty if you do it on purpose. Did I say that the only things you're liable for the death penalty are things that you would have to bring a korban for? I didn't say that. I said anything that's A is B. That doesn't mean that everything that's B is A.
Right. The converse
right?
Isn't always true.
The converse isn't always true. Just because every action that if done by accident requires a korban, if done on purpose, requires the death penalty, doesn't mean that all things that require the death penalty necessarily will necessitate a korban if done by accident. It doesn't work the opposite way. You can't necessarily reverse the syllogism, as we would say. It doesn't work in reverse. So therefore, the Gemara says that you can still sustain this. You can sustain the position that yes, everything that necessitates a korban when done by accident necessitates the death penalty when done on purpose. However, there are certain things that require the death penalty when done on purpose, even if they don't require a korban. It's not a contradiction. You can have more things in category B than are in category A. It's just that everything, if you think of a Venn diagram, everything in category A is in category B, but that doesn't mean that that's the only thing in category B. There could be other things in category B as well. So now the Gemara says, Rava Achoadim Rav Mari Bar Rachel, that Rava, the brother of Rav Mari, the son of Rachel, Va'amrela, and some say Avua de Rav Mari Bar Rachel, and some say the father of Rav Mari Bar Rachel, that this was Rava, the father of Rav Mari Bar Rachel. Lishna Batra Kashya, and there's a problem with the second version. It's interjected here. Ha de Rav Achsherei le Rav Mari Bar Rachel, Omanye bePursei de Bavel Dil Matre Mari Bar Rachel Havu. So the point here is this is like this should be in parentheses in a way, that there were two attributions. One was to Rava, who was the brother of Rav Mari Bar Rachel. That wasn't a problem. Then there was Rava, the father of Rav Mari Bar Rachel, which is a problem. Because Rav Mari Bar Rachel was a person who was called by his mother's name, Bar Rachel, because his mother actually was kidnapped by non-Jewish captors and was sexually assaulted, and he ended up, being born from that union. So his father actually wasn't Jewish. Later on, the father actually repented and became a Jew and converted to Judaism, but that was later. So he was called Bar Rachel. But the problem is that it says in the Gemara that Rav had to give a special dispensation to Rav Mari Bar Rachel to lead in a leadership position, because normally somebody whose father was from a non-Jewish background wouldn't be allowed to. You had to be Jewish on both sides to be able to lead. So Rav had to give a special dispensation to this individual to allow him to lead. So how could it be if really Rava was his father and not the non-Jew? Because it says Rava, the father of Rav Mari Bar Rachel. Well, if he was the father of Rav Mari Bar Rachel, that would mean that Rav Mari Bar Rachel had a father that was Jewish. So it wouldn't make sense. So it says there were really two Rav Mari Bar Rachel. There were two people by that name. One who had a father named Rava, and one whose father was a non-Jew. So there was, and needed a special dispensation from Rav to lead. That's the only way you can sustain this version. There were some who removed this parenthetical statement from the Talmud altogether, and it's a sidebar anyway. So now, Hava matne la hashmated mishmei Rabbi Yochanan. Liftor. So this version of this Rava, whoever Rava was, this person named Rava, taught the statement of Rami Bar Chama in a different way, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, la pitur, in a manner of exemption. What does that mean? So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, that Rabbi Yochanan said, okay, that if a person leads their animal carrying something on Shabbat, he's exempt. If he does it by accident, he's completely exempt. That because everything is connected to idolatry, as we said before, we learn out the concept that what violations require a korban chatat from the case of idolatry. And just like idolatry, you have to do it with your own body in order to be liable. And when it comes to this, you have to be doing it with your own body to be liable as well. And you're not. You're doing it with the animal. And moreover, even with regard to doing it on purpose, there's no consequence. Ditnan, as we said in the Mishnah, it should say chayavin al zidonok. It should say chayavim al zidono skila. That anything that you do that makes you liable for a korban chatat if it's done by accident will make you liable for the death penalty if done on purpose. So he actually upholds the previous reasoning and says, you know what? It is exclusive. Only things. It doesn't mean that everything that you're liable a korban for, if you do it by accident, you're liable to the death penalty for if it's done on purpose. And there are also other things that you could be liable to the death penalty for. It doesn't mean that. Rabbi Yochanan is taking the literal sense that only all those things that you bring a korban for if they're done by accident will make you liable to the death penalty if they're done on purpose.
The idol
He's taking it as He's taking it as exclusive. So it's exclusive. So that means there's no korban if you did this by accident. There's no sikila. There's no death penalty if you did it on purpose. And belav nami lo mechayev. Not only are you not going to be liable for a korban if you do it by accident. Not only is it not a chilul Shabbat that's going to make you liable for the death penalty if you did it on purpose, but even as a negative commandment, you're not going to be held responsible. Meaning you won't even get makot. You won't even get whipped by the bet din for violating. Normally, if there's an action, if you do an action which is a lo ta'aseh, a negative commandment that's violated through an action, you get the standard punishment is lokin. You give him whipping 39 lashes, right? So the 39 lashes won't even be given to him. Why? Because the problem is a technical problem. The technical problem that since this concept of mechamer, of not causing your animal to work on Shabbat, is expressed in a verse that talks about the biblically, or that talks about the fundamental prohibitions of Shabbat, the ones that you are liable to the death penalty for, since it's expressed in the same pasuk, and yet it can't be subject to the same penalty, it's sort of in a limbo. So since it's nitan lazarat mitat bedin, in other words, it's expressed, it's articulated in the context of capital offenses of violating Shabbat, because when it lists what you're not allowed to do, it says you're not allowed to do malacha and also your animal. So it's expressed in the same verse. It doesn't have its own verse. It doesn't have its own pasuk. So it doesn't have its own pasuk to justify whipping you for doing it. And yet it's in the pasuk with death penalty offenses, but it can't be subject to the death penalty, because it's not similar to the case of idolatry where you're doing it with your own body. So therefore it's in limbo and we can't impose any penalty according to Rabbi Yochanan. So Rashi explains, because we learn all the melachot from the same pasuk. Okay? And there that's why it's called lav, so that's why it says azara, so azara yilkach lazarat mitat bedin nitan dela anash mita ela im ken izir. So the main point of those psukim is to tell you about the capital offense for violating Shabbat. And therefore we can't use that pasuk to justify punishing you for making your animal work on Shabbat. So you might say, so then I'll put it in the same category with the other melachot of Shabbat. Can't do that either, because it doesn't fit the model of capital offenses. And we turn to Amud Bet. Even according to the one who says that you don't need a separate pasuk to justify imposing a penalty like whipping on a person who does who violates the Torah. If the Torah wanted to impose a penalty on you, then it should have put the words "don't do any melacha" and your animal together. Ata. Why does it say you and your animal? Why does it emphasize you? Lamali. By emphasizing, by saying ata uvincha uvitecha, by describing all the human beings, including you, saying you and your family, etc., and then saying your animal, it means you are in a different category than your animal. Otherwise, it would have just said, don't do any melacha, your animal, right? And your animal. But the fact that it emphasizes you and your animal means you and your animal are not on the same level. Your violation is a capital offense. The animal, when you violate Shabbat through making your animal work, it's also considered chilul Shabbat. It's also considered a desecration of Shabbat, but not on the same level of severity. That's why it says ata as a separate category, you versus your animal, rather than just saying don't do any melacha and also your animal shouldn't do any melacha, which would have been the way to say it if it wanted to put them on the same level. So we said when the person arrives with their animal laden with stuff on Shabbat and they want to drop the stuff off of the animal, okay, so what happens? They come to the closest secure place and they do it. So Amar Rav says, if the animal was carrying glass, so what's he going to do now? He's going to drop it off the animal, it's going to shatter. So what does he do? Maybe Karum Ksatot, he should bring various kinds of pillows and mattresses or whatever, pillows and other soft things. He puts it under the animal. So then he unties the burden and it will fall. He can't handle it because we're assuming it's muktzeh here. But he can release it and it will fall. He doesn't want it to fall if it's glass, so he puts some cushions and things underneath so that it will land on them. But didn't we learn in the Mishnah that you're allowed to handle whatever is not muktzeh? And why is glass muktzeh? If he has plates, let's say, on the animal, that's not muktzeh. Why should it be muktzeh? So what he's talking about is glass items that are muktzeh. For example, the little tubes that they would use for bloodletting. So you can't do bloodletting on Shabbat. So these tubes that the animal's carrying, it would be like if it was carrying pipettes or whatever from, these things are not useful on Shabbat, and we don't want them to smash. So that's why we can't touch them directly, but we cushion underneath. So the Gemara says, that haven't we learned earlier? Whoa, okay. We learned earlier that that you cannot create a situation where something that's not muktzeh becomes muktzeh on Shabbat. Right? When you can't put a muktzeh item on a non-muktzeh item on Shabbat, because Rashi says it's like destroying it. Because that thing that was usable on Shabbat now has a muktzeh thing on it, it's not useful anymore. Alternatively, some say it's like binyan, because it's like you're fixing it in place because you can't move it now. Okay, but either way, you're not allowed to do it on Shabbat. So how can you allow these muktzeh things to fall onto these cushions and pillows? It's going to make the cushions and pillows muktzeh. And you're not allowed to make something muktzeh, to render it muktzeh on Shabbat. So what does the Gemara say? We're talking about small items, okay? These are small items, like these little pipettes. So what happens? You can just, when it falls onto the pillow, okay, you can lean the pillow a little bit. It'll fall on another pillow, so it gets to the ground. So it's not big enough that really it's going to stay in place the whole time. It's going to rest on the pillow. You're going to tilt the pillow. It'll go from pillow to pillow till it gently rests on the ground, and no problem. Now, there is an objection. What if your animal was carrying tevel? It was carrying untithed produce, or it was carrying, Rashi has the version here, ashashiyot shel zechuchit, glass types of kelim, glass types of vessels. So what does the Mishnah say, or what does the Braita say here? It says, Matir d'chavalim v'asakin noflim v'afal pi shemishtabrin. It says you untie the burden, you let it fall, even though it's going to smash. You let it smash. So wait a second. Didn't we just say that we don't let it smash? We bring cushions and pillows and we put it under the glass? So why is it... Right, so that was only for small things. What the Gemara was going to say, Hatam bekulsa, there it's talking about large pieces of glass that that Rashi says actually are going to be cut anyway, because they're going to be made into windows or whatever. They're large plates of glass. Large, slabs of glass, whatever you want to call them. And so you're allowed to, since they're large, if you drop them onto a cushion, it would make the cushion immobile for Shabbat, so you're not allowed to do that. Since breaking them is not considered a major loss, because you're going to break them anyway to use them, you're going to break them into different shapes, so it's not a problem to let them fall. So, Dikanami, we can also see a proof for this, Dikatane, because it says, Dumiyad de Tevel. It's put in the same Mishnah as Tevel, untithed produce. Ma Tevel de la Chazele, just like Tevel is something that can't be used on Shabbat. Tevel, because you can't tithe on Shabbat. So, Afachanami, la Chazele, it's not something that can be used. O my Afal Pishem Mishtabrin, why does it say, even though they're going to break, you still can't touch them? What was the thought that the fact that they're going to break would allow you to touch them? So the answer is because have said maybe you would think that they were concerned, the rabbis would be concerned about even a minor loss. Kamash malan, since it's not really a major loss, they're not going to allow you to handle these muktzeh items on Shabbat. So Tanya, we learned in a Braita, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, if your animal was carrying a package of produce, what you can do is push it with your head off of the animal. In other words, you have to do it in an indirect way. And we're assuming that for some reason it's positioned in a way that you can't just release it, like we said, untie it and let it fall. So you have to use your head to knock it over onto the other side. And it will fall. Once the chamor, the donkey of Rabban Gamliel was carrying honey, and he wouldn't release the honey that it was carrying until after Shabbat. And by Motzei Shabbat it died from holding the heavy burden all Shabbat. It couldn't handle it. I guess it died. Didn't we learn in the Mishnah? Didn't we learn that you're allowed to handle things that are not mukteh? Why is honey mukteh? Honey's food. Why can't he take it and use it and put it on his bread or something? The answer is kishehidvish. This honey had become sour. It was ruined honey. So hidvish lemay chazi. So why is he carrying it then if it's sour? Because you could use it as a salve for the wounds of camels. Apparently they would rub that into the flesh of camels. It's so interesting, the sociological things that you learn from this, right? So they would rub it into...
Well, honey has...
medicinal properties.
Now, bee honey. Is this bee honey or is this dvash tamarim?
It sounds like bee honey.
So bee honey, especially...
Even in the Talmud, when they use dvash, they mean bee honey, unless they say when the Torah is talking about
bee honey. Matter of fact, the bee honey they sell in New Zealand is touted as having very, very high levels of antimicrobial and all different types of.
I'm not aware that honey is spores.
Is that what
honey doesn't.
I don't know. Maybe I don't know.
Is that why they don't give it to babies?
They don't give it to babies because it has.
Because you can get botulism, right?
It can have spores and stuff like
It's not
that.
antimicrobial.
They don't have an immune system to handle it.
It has organisms that are in a state that are not active, but can.
Yeah, that was the thing the Rambam says. Is that's one of the things that the Rambam actually says in the Mishneh Torah. Don't feed honey to babies. And everyone for many years thought it was it's some old wives' tale we're talking about. It turns out it's true. Now, if you look at a honey jar, it always says, "Do not feed this to anybody under 1 year."
That's the origin of using your head also.
Use your head. Yeah, you got to use your. Yeah, you have to use your head. That's right. Okay. So I'm sure somebody's going to post a pun like that somewhere today, because I always read these guys commenting in the daf,
So why Rabbi Shimon
So he didn't release it because it was honey that apparently was, I don't know, fermented or something.
Something happens.
So fermented honey that they would use as medicine, but they couldn't use it on Shabbat, so he didn't take it off, and he died. So v'yatir chavalim v'yiplu sakin. Why didn't he just release it and let it fall, like we said you could do? So what was the problem with that? What was the problem with letting it fall? So the answer is because if he did that, mitzdaruzike, that it would break and it would be lost. It would be ruined. He didn't want to ruin it. He didn't want to lose it. So, in other words, the pouches would break open. So, so why don't we use the strategy that we suggested earlier of putting pillows underneath to cushion the fall, so that when these pouches fall, they don't burst, and then we won't have a problem. So the answer is mitanfed, that they're going to get dirty, because the honey will spill on them and you're going to ruin the pillows. And we said that the condition on using the pillows is that they're not going to be rendered unusable from cushioning. So if they're going to be rendered unusable because this muktzeh liquid is going to spill on them, then we can't use it. We can't use that strategy. So then, like he says, and that's going to cause the pillows to be unusable on Shabbat, and you're not allowed to do that. What about the fact that there's tsar balei chayim? You're causing pain to an animal. And so you should be able to override the prohibition of muktzeh for the sake of the animal, because the animal is, in other words, allow the stuff to fall onto the pillows, and they will be now unusable for Shabbat. So you made something unusable on Shabbat. That's just a rabbinical prohibition, right? It's a rabbinical prohibition, but you're causing the animal suffering. So the Gemara says, Kasavar tzar balei chayim derabanan, that according to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, causing pain to animals is also only a rabbinical prohibition. You're not supposed to kill them, obviously. He didn't intend for his animal to die, but causing a little bit of discomfort to an animal is not a biblical prohibition. So you've got one rabbinic prohibition against another, and he was stuck. That Abaye found that Rabbah was sliding his son down the side of a donkey on Shabbat. In other words, he was like playing slide with him. So Amarle said to him, how can you use animals on Shabbat? You're not allowed to lean on or ride on an animal on Shabbat. An animal is muktzeh. Amarle said to him, I'm only using the side of the animal. I'm not putting him on the animal. The rabbis did not prohibit you from using the side of an animal, only from being on top of the animal. So, or leaning on the animal, but just sliding him down the side of the animal is okay. So is that true? So minatim, where did I get this from? Ditnan. As it says in the Mishnah, matir chavlim v'asakin nofaleim, that it says that you're allowed to untie the burden of the animal and allow it to fall. My love, isn't it talking about bechever gival? Where am I? Right, where is that? My love, bechaber gevalaki, isn't it talking about this kind of a pouch? Dehavu lahu tzedadin, utzedadin lohavu behu rabanan. So it's talking about a type of burden to the animal. That is, Rashi explains on the side that what you would have is you would have a. He says.
It's like a napkin.
Shtayim mechubarot yachad b'ritzuot. So you would have the two sides tied together, and umarkivin ala chamor zem mikan v'zem mikan. So you would have the two pouches on either side of the animal. Okay, and so therefore, and on either side, and so you would have to handle. You would have to handle in a way the side of the animal in order to release the bag. Right there, you go. So you would have to handle the side of the animal. So you see that I'm not handling the top of the animal, but I'm handling the side, and it's okay to do that on Shabbat, apparently, when the saddlebag is on the side. So the Gemara says, wait a second, not necessarily, because the Gemara says no. So b'chaver, b'chaver agavalki. It's talking about agavalki. It's talking about another thing. Delo havu tzedadin, which is not tzedadin, is not the sides. So Rashi says that they're not connected together. Rather, there is some kind of a clip that has a strap and a metal piece, and all you have to do actually is pull out the clip. And when you pull out the clip, it should come out naturally. You don't really have to touch the side of the animal at all. You don't have to lean against the side of the animal or push it at all. Alternatively, right, it's some kind of a clasp or something. That's agavalki. Right.
It's a saddlebag.
Aglavaki is
a modified saddlebag.
Right. So the lo havu tzedadin inami belachta, or it's some kind of a clip. Again, Rashi says that there's some kind of a ring that's used. The point is that either way, this is some kind of a thing that you can just pull out whatever connects it, and it falls by itself. You don't have to handle the side of the animal at all, versus something where you've tied it and you have to handle the side of the animal and touch the side of the animal as you are trying to dislodge or release the package. Okay, but that's the point. Exactly how it is doesn't matter so much. They're just giving examples from their time. For us, we understand the meaning that if you would have to lean against or handle the side of the animal in releasing the packages, that would be a problem. If not, if you could just unclip something and it falls, so that would be okay. But that doesn't prove to us that you can lean on the side of the animal, right? Because we could just assume that it's talking about a case where you don't need to lean against it. So now the Gemara says, okay, so we raise an objection. This is talking about sukkah. If two of the walls are supported by artificial walls, and one is supported by a tree, kshera, it's still kasher. But you can't go into it on Yom Tov, because since this sukkah only has 3 walls, and the third wall is attached to a tree or supported by a tree, and either it means that the floor is supported by the tree, or it means that the wall itself is leaning on the tree. Okay, so in that case, you can't use this sukkah on Yom Tov itself, only on Chol HaMoed. And the reason Rashi says is because since the sechach will be resting on the tree, and people used to put things on the schach, you'll be basically effectively using the tree. Because since part of the schach is resting on the tree, and people used to put something on the schach, they would put things on the schach, so therefore you're actually leaning things on the tree indirectly, because your schach is attached to the tree. Is leaning because the wall is leaning against the tree. So that's the way that Rashi says. So, my love dechak be'ilana. Be'ilan, da'avulu tzedadin u'tzedadin asurin. So the Gemara says this is a refutation of what you're saying, Rabbah, because you see that we're talking about a case where they made holes in the tree and they inserted the poles into the holes of the tree. Okay, and that's considered tzedadim. That's considered, in other words, the wall was inserted into the side of the tree, and yet it's still considered using the tree, even though it's only the side of the tree. It's not the body of the tree, but it's just the side of the tree. And yet you're not allowed to use it. They attached the wall, in other words, to the tree. Yeah.
What's the difference between the body of the tree and the side of the tree?
Well, he's suggesting this as that there's a difference. He's trying to argue that that's not really leaning on the tree itself. You're just on the side of the tree is just the outside of it. The outside surface is not as muktzeh as the top, right? So that's how he's trying to say. So he says, "Lo the kafyel ilan v'nachzi chuchi lavei." The answer is that no. This is talking about where you bent the tree over and you placed the schach on it. That's why it's a problem. If it were just the side of the tree, it wouldn't be a problem, according to Rabbah. But here we're talking about where you bent the tree and you made it and you leaned and you put the schach directly on it. Because you're using the tree directly. If that's true, what about the end? If there are 3 walls and the 4th wall is the tree, so you're going to have a problem, because according to you, even though there's only the 4th wall is considered to be is the one that's the tree, still, why should you be able to use it on Yom Tov? Because you're definitely still going to be using the tree, because you're telling me that the tree is bent and it's actually the schach is resting on the tree. And you're going to rest things on the schach. So you're resting stuff on the tree. So why should it be any different if it's the third wall or the fourth wall? Resting stuff on the tree is resting stuff on the tree either way. So he says, so you're going to tell me that tzidadim, that it's talking about where the wall is leaning against the side of the tree, it's the same thing. So you have the same problem. Whether you say, if you're telling me the side of the tree is prohibited, or it's using the body of the tree, it shouldn't matter, according to you. So what's the answer? De'ilan gufei dofen be'almahu deshavya. So the answer is that it's talking about where the sechach is not resting on the wall at all. It's just a big, thick tree, and it's a wide tree, and basically you put up 3 walls. Right, you put up 3 walls. And the fourth wall is just there. It's not. There's no sechach resting on it at all. So since it's not forming an integral part of the sukkah, it's functioning as a wall, but you didn't really put the sechach on it or anything like that. That's why you're allowed to use it, right? So we can't prove anything about tzidadim from here, about whether the side of the tree, because we could say that the case where it prohibited it is where you're using the body of the tree, not just the side. And the case where it permitted it is talking about where the tree is not even really part of the sukkah at all, essentially. And this is a proof. We can bring a proof to this because it says kol. It should say she'ilu, probably yinatila ilan v'chola la'amod olin la b'yom tov. That it said that any case in which if you remove the tree, the sukkah would still stand is okay. Shema mina. So that shows you that it's talking about a case where the tree was not really an integral part of the sukkah. That's where you're allowed to go in it, even on Yom Tov. Lema katanai. We can say that this is really a dispute of Tanaim, whether the sides of muktzeh things or just the tops. Because you have 2 cases. You have the animal case and you have the tree case. In both cases, you're not allowed to be on top of a tree. You're not allowed to climb a tree. You're not allowed to climb onto an animal. What about the sides of it? Are you allowed to lean on the sides of the tree or the sides of the animal? This could be a dispute of Tanaim, because we have the following: En olin la b'yom tov, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Omer b'shem Rabbi Meir, olin la b'yom tov, because we have a machloket between Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar in the name of Rabbi Meir and the Tanakama. The Tanakama says you cannot utilize this tree, this sukkah that has a tree as its third wall on Yom Tov. You can't go in. And according to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, you can. So my love, maybe they're arguing about this very issue. That they're talking about a case where, what did you do? You leaned the wall of the sukkah against the tree. And therefore your schach is leaning now against the tree. And that's why you're against the side of the tree. So one of them says, well, since it's only leaning against the side of the tree, it's not on top of the tree, it's still okay. The other one says, no, since you're leaning against the side of the tree, it's still, in other words, the question is whether the side of the tree is equivalent to the top of the tree. So Abaye says, Amar Abaye lo. Everybody agrees you can't lean on the side of the tree just like you can't be on top of the tree. However, the issue here is the side of the side. What is the side of the side? That means you put a pole into the tree. Okay, right, some kind of poles you put into the tree. So you're not directly putting the schach onto the side of the tree. You made a hole in the side of the tree and you put the schach right into it. You're not dealing with that. Right. What we're talking about is that the pole protrudes from the tree and you're leaning on the poles. Okay, so it's one step removed. You're leaning on something that itself is attached to the side of the tree. Oh boy, here comes the snow. So that's what we're talking about here. So, that's the machloket. Whether that level of removal, whether once they prohibited the sides of the tree, even if you have poles sticking out of the sides and you're leaning against something indirectly leaning against the sides of the tree, it still will be prohibited or not.
If you're only playing on the side of the donkey with your kid, maybe that's not the same as leaning.
Well, it would seem like it's the same, but if there's something attached to the animal side, in other words, there's something protruding from the animal, and you're playing with that might be okay.
It's like klisheni.
Right, it's the one step removed from the side itself. Right, so Rava says, Rava says, you know what? Whoever says that the side is prohibited also says that the side of the side is prohibited. Rava says there's no distinction. If you're going to say that the side is prohibited, then the side of the side is prohibited. And if you're going to say that the side is permitted, then the side of the side obviously is permitted. In other words, there's no distinction here. Abaye wants to argue that there's a distinction here. There is an objection. Rav Misharshi said, no, there is a distinction, because na'at yated be'ilan, if you put a stick or a pole into a tree, v'talaba kalkala, and you hung a basket from the stick, and what did you put in there? You put your eruv techomin, because you want to be able to travel, let's say, more than 2,000 amot past the city limits. So the rabbis created a situation where if you, let's say, 1,000 amot outside, place an eruv, that gives you another 2,000 amot to travel in that direction. But the key is that the eruv techomin, the food that you leave there, has to be accessible to you on Shabbat, which means if the place is a reshut harabim, it can't be in a reshut hayachid. If the place is a reshut hayachid, it can't be in a reshut harabim. It has to be in a place that you have access to. Okay? So here, if the kalkala, if the basket is above 10 tefachim and eruv, then it's not an eruv. Why? Because it's going to be considered to be in a reshut hayachid, in its own private domain, and you can't obtain the food. There's no way you can get the food, because you can't go into the basket, and you're going to be standing in the public domain. And if it's lemata miyot tvachim eruv, if it's within 10 tvachim of the ground, then it is an eruv, because it's considered to be in the public domain with you, and you can take out of the basket and eat from it, so it will be perfectly valid eruv. Tama dina'at yated be'ilan. But this is only talking about a case where you stuck a pole in the side of the tree and you hung the basket from the pole. Ha lo na'at afilu lemata miyot tvachim eruv. So what it seems to say is that if you hung, let's say you had hung the basket on the tree itself, on the side of the tree itself, that it wouldn't be good even if it were lower than 10 tefachim. Why? Because you're using the side of the tree. And the side of the tree is no good. But the side of the side is good, because if you stick a pole into the tree and you hang it from the pole, it's okay. So that proves to you that there's a difference between a pole stuck in the side of the tree and the side of the tree itself. So the Gemara says, no. Not a proof. So he says, he concludes his argument by saying that you see that the same Tana that prohibits the side is also going to prohibit the side of the side. So now Amar Papa says, we're talking about a tight basket. The problem is here that we're talking about a type of basket that you really have to stick your hand into it in order to get the food out of. It's not an open basket, but it's a basket that you have to stick your hand in. So if it were on the side of the tree itself, you would actually move the tree itself. It could very well be that there's no difference between the side of the tree and the side of the side, and that really, even if the basket were hanging directly on the tree, it wouldn't be a problem. But we're talking about a case where if you needed to take the food from this basket, you would end up moving the tree because it's such a tight opening to get your hand in. That's why the only time that they allowed it was when a pole is inserted in the tree and it's hanging from the pole. But in essence, the point is that there is no difference between the side of the tree and the side of the side, because the only reason why they're requiring it to be more removed from the tree in this case is because of the concern that you're going to move the entire tree by trying to pull stuff out of the basket. What's the conclusion? The conclusion is that the sides are prohibited, but the sides of the sides are not prohibited. They're permitted. Amar Rav Ashi says, that if you have a ladder that you need to climb up, you should not lean the ladder against a tree. Even though you're only using the side of the tree, you're not going onto the tree itself. You're using the side of the tree. You're leaning weight against the side of the tree. You can't do that. However, because that's the sides of the tree. But what you do is, if you put some kind of stuff, like poles or whatever sticking out of the tree, you can lean the ladder against those poles, because that's one step removed. That's the side of the side, right? And when you go down, don't go down on the spokes that are sticking out of the side of the tree, because that's actually using the side of the tree itself directly. You have to walk down the ladder. So the ladder is a step removed. The spokes or whatever, the poles that are sticking out of the tree, are using the side of the tree itself. But the ladder that's leaning against the spokes, those are okay. That ladder is okay to walk up and down. So in the end, the Gemara is concluding that what Rabbah was doing, sliding his son down the side of the animal, was not really allowed on Shabbat, because using the side is just like sitting on top of the tree or the animal. But having something that protrudes from the side is enough of an indirect leaning on the animal or the tree that it would actually be allowed.